quick one revision of the Apprentice Boys of Derry. So as we know, they are one of our Northern Ireland case studies, which are prescribed for documents this year. And I'm just going to go through the map and recap, so you're fresh the night before the exam. So what are they? Who are they? They are a cultural organisation. That's how they would define themselves, and they represent a particular aspect or part of the population. Sector is the correct word, of the population in Ulster and in Northern Ireland. Ulster's 9 counties, Northern Ireland is 6 counties, but the Apprentice Boys are a part of a wider kind of orange movement, and that movement is represents the Protestant Unionist sector of the population. They are an organisation that to that part of the population are symbolic of pride, symbolic of identity, and of the significance of history. So they are a very important organisation, and they do have branches. I mentioned, the reason I said Ulster and then I said Northern Ireland is because they're not limited to Derry. We associate them with Derry correctly because that's where they're headquartered and that's where they're most associated with, but they are an organisation with branches all over the world, Ireland, Scotland and North America. Okay? Now, the title of the organisation, as we know, goes back to the Siege of Derry in the late 1600s, when there was a struggle for control of Ireland between the English king, who was a Catholic, James II, and the Protestant king, who was the Dutch king, William of Orange, who was a Protestant. And the Dutch king, William of Orange, was vying to take control of the English throne, with the support of lots of people in England, because they didn't want a Catholic king. So those Jacobite was a supporter of James, Williamite, a supporter of William, wars. They were like a turning point in Irish history, because the Williamite side won, the Protestant side won, and that meant that they then had hegemony or control in Ireland for the next 200 and odd years, okay, and longer than that, I suppose, in Northern Ireland. So it was a turning point when Catholicism and the Catholic population were defeated, and Protestantism and the Protestant population became the ascendancy. Okay, now again, the ascendancy, that word ascendancy is an important term. It means like to be on top. So the Protestant ascendancy was this very, very small group of very wealthy landowners. But the idea, when I say ascendancy, I mean that the laws were structured in such a way as to discriminate against Catholics and to favour Protestants in the 1700s and the 1800s, or part of the 1800s. So we know the story of the 13 Apprentice Boys closing the gates, and we know the siege, and we know Robert Lundy, the traitor, who's burnt in effigy every year. That stuff's okay. You can put it into your answer, but it's not really what the examiner's looking for you to talk about. What they're looking for you to talk about is the modern significance of the Apprentice Boys. And one of the key things is to think about the motto, which is no surrender. Now that goes back again to the siege and the idea. You can probably hear the seagulls outside here, lads and brother. But that goes back again to the siege and the idea of no surrender. But it's something which resonates a lot with, or resonated, I suppose, I can't speak for the present members of the Apprentice Boys, but resonated a lot with Apprentice Boys in the 20th century in particular, and certainly also in the 19th century. Where we really see the Apprentice Boys becoming an important organisation is actually not until over 100 years after the Siege of Derry. And it's in the first couple of decades of the 19th century. Because in the 19th century, the Apprentice Boys of Derry Club was formed in 1814, and the No Surrender Club, which is connected and affiliated, was established in 1824. I said 1814, 1824. And that was at a time when Daniel O'Connell was leading the campaign for Catholic emancipation from the penal laws. So as I said, after the Williamite victory in the 1690s, there was a complete revolution in the government of Ireland and the laws of Ireland. And over a period of years, these penal laws, these laws designed to penalise, were enforced against Catholics, and that meant that Protestants had rights that Catholics didn't have. But by the 19th century, so 100 and odd years later, there's a big campaign in Ireland to end the penal laws and to give equal rights to Catholics, rights to vote, rights to an education, rights to ownership of land, rights to practice the professions. These were all rights that Catholics were not entitled to, and particularly they weren't entitled to the right to vote. That's what emancipation was, the right to vote. Now, it's interesting that as the campaign for Catholic emancipation grew, organisations like the Apprentice Boys were founded and attracted members. So there's no question whatsoever that the development and growth of the Apprentice Boys historically came about as a result of the Protestant population feeling threatened that their position or their rights were might be lost or eroded. And there's a correlation, you think, historically between what went on in the 19th century at the beginning and then in the mid 20th century. So remember, important to know that they march every year in Derry in August and December along the city walls in order to in order to commemorate the siege. Now that is a cultural celebration in the same way as St. Patrick's Day is a cultural celebration, in the same way as in the United States 4th of July celebrations are cultural celebrations, in the same way as any people celebrate their culture or important moments in their history. The thing about the Apprentice Boys celebrating in August and December annually is that it was always seen as a sectarian celebration. When they fired Roaring Meg off the walls, this old cannon that made this enormous bloody sound, it was perceived by the Catholic population of Derry as a reminder of their secondary status. The Apprentice Boys celebrations were seen as by Catholics, by nationalists, as not a celebration of their culture, as it was and remains the view from Protestants. But Catholics, from their point of view, saw this triumphalism. This idea that we're celebrating putting you in your place. We're celebrating being your superiors. Know your place. This is our place. We own it. We won it. So that's how it was perceived by members of the Catholic population in Derry. And from a very early stage, the Apprentice Boys marches, as they were viewed, and the argument will go back and forth, but correctly viewed as sectarian, often were then the spark for civil unrest and violence and riots. And a really good point to refer to is that 1869 British government report. There was a riot in Londonderry, and the British government themselves found in that riot that the character of the demonstrations, in other words, the way the Apprentice Boys celebrate their commemorations with the big and lambeg drums and playing the whistles and marching through Catholic areas, and this idea, as I said, of triumphalism, that is viewed by the Catholics in a hostile way, and therefore they were a spark for conflict between the two communities. The Catholic area of Derry is called the Bogside, Protestant area is called the Waterside, and the Apprentice Boys always marched through the Bogside, saying that's their traditional route. But the Catholics always said, "Why are you marching through here? You're not from here." And then another symbol of the Apprentice Boys as an organisation designed to remind Catholics of their secondary status, an organisation that was seen as a sectarian organisation, was the construction of the Walker Pillar in 1832. Now that was 81 foot high, and it commemorated an important person in the history of Unionist and Protestant culture, and it was built right overlooking the Bogside. as a reminder. Look up, we're in charge. Look up, you are not. This is not your town. This is our town. So that tension was always there from their foundation between the populations of this very divided city. But of course, it all burst into, really tragic violence with the 1969, which led to, is seen as the starting point of what we now call the Troubles. The Troubles, are traced back to actually the starting point was the Battle of the Bogside in 1969 in Derry, which came about as a result of Catholics refusing to let the Apprentice Boys march through their area at the Bogside, and the intervention of the police, and then the escalation of the violence. And that, of course, then led to the further spread of violence across the north of Ireland. The Battle of the Bogside is a key event in Irish history, a key event in the history of Northern Ireland. Now, it's important to remember that today the Apprentice Boys still exist, and they're still an organisation which is seen as an expression of pride and identity by Protestants and must be respected as that. But they're also seen today as an organisation which is founded upon sectarianism. And there are marches which continue today. While those marches are not allowed to go through Catholic areas, there's now a parades commission since the Good Friday Agreement. That is still an issue of great contention amongst members of the Apprentice Boys. They feel they should be allowed to march along their traditional routes, but of course, that tension might lead to violence, so they're not allowed to. One thing to note is that in 1986, violence at an Apprentice Boys march in Portadown led to the death of Keith White, and he's the only Protestant who was killed by a plastic bullet during the Troubles. There were many Catholics killed by plastic bullets during the Troubles, but you can see that in the middle of the Troubles, the Apprentice Boys were at the heart of a lot of the conflict and a lot of the division that marked the society tragically throughout the late 60s, 70s, 80s, and most of the 1990s. So hopefully that helps you write your kind of paragraph on who the Apprentice Boys are, how they're viewed by both sides of the community, and the important elements of the important features of their story.